Hey, it's Chris, the Supply Chain Doctor and host of Supply Chain is Boring, where we provide insight into the history of supply chain management and expose you to some of the industry's thought leaders and driving forces. In this episode, we sat down with industry veteran Duncan Klett to learn more about his career and why he started Kinaxis, one of the great supply chain technology companies. It all sounds pretty boring, so let's see if Duncan can prove me wrong. Duncan, thanks again for investing time with me to hear about your career and learn about your perspectives on supply chain management.
Well, Chris, thank you for inviting me and letting me talk, and I'm looking forward to the session.
You're a co-founder with a major supply chain company, Kinaxis, and I look forward to learning more about the start, development, and even the current status of the organization. But Duncan, for now, let's learn a little bit about you. You're from Canada. You attended the University of British Columbia, and you studied electrical engineering. So tell us a little bit about why you chose that organization, why you studied engineering.
I grew up in Vancouver, BC, and actually grew up fairly close to the UBC campus, so I don't know, 2 or 3 miles away. In those days, everybody from my high school that went to university, almost everybody went to UBC. There was really no choice. I guess I had a few friends who went to med school other than UBC, but almost everybody that from that school went to UBC. So it was a no-brainer to go to UBC. In terms of engineering, I love understanding how things are made and how things go together and how things work. And I like, even as a little kid, I used to like taking things apart and hopefully put them back together again with no pieces left on the table when you were done. So yeah, engineering was also kind of a no-brainer. I like math and science as well. And so yeah, building things, understanding how things work, good place to go.
Now, was electrical engineering, was that computer-related engineering or?
Well, you got to remember, I started UBC, I think, in 1970. So I did electrical engineering. A lot of it was computer science. So starting from NAND gates, NOR gates, flip-flops and stuff like that, and transistors, even tube theory, I think we did a little bit of that. And then it rapidly led into computer science, although I guess there was a computer science faculty at UBC at the time, but I was really interested in the nuts and bolts of things, how things really worked. So I stayed in engineering but did a lot of programming and computer science type stuff as well.
Okay, yeah, because now I know computer science is its own study, but a lot of times it originates out of electrical engineering. What was your first job out of university?
First job out of university was Bell Northern Research, which is kind of like Bell Labs that you would be familiar with, part of Northern Telecom and Bell Canada. Developed the telephone systems that, well, Bell Canada used, and then Nortel sold off to other parts of the world. It was a center. It was almost like another grad school. Its offices in Ottawa. It's like another grad school. You could go there and do some really interesting things. And it was also a real focus on high performance real-time systems and high reliability. So if I remember correctly, the spec for telephone systems was 2 hours downtime in 40 years. So hugely high reliable systems. And of course you expect dial tone, and there was a spec on that too. I think you had to get dial tone within 3 seconds. So as we computerized the telephone network, went from the old Strowger rotary switches to computers driving the whole system. That's what I was involved in, the real-time programming. As a kid out of school, it was a great place to be, doing lots of interesting things and learning lots about real-time systems.
Yeah, I even remember, I think in the States, you mentioned the Bell Labs. That was a popular think tank, and a lot of thought leaders came out of that organization, at least in the, as I say, in the States.
Yeah, I actually had an opportunity to visit the Bell Labs headquarters, Murray Hill, New Jersey, I guess that is. It's now part of, I guess it's now part of Nokia. It's gone through Bell, Lucent, Alcatel-Lucent, and now Nokia. But walking the halls there and seeing the pictures on the wall of the inventors of transistors like Schottky and people like that, it's almost a religious experience, actually.
So I hear you like to put things together, create systems, concepts, and so that links us into Kinaxis that you started in, what, 1984, or you were the founder?
Yeah.
Where did the idea come from? And tell me about how that all started.
Well, the three of us who started the company were all at Mitel, and they made PBX telephone equipment, but also did the chips that gave it unique performance and capabilities. And so we were on the design automation side of the organization, so helping our chip designers primarily develop new technologies. Yeah, so that's where we started from. We also had responsibility for running the company's MRP system. At the time, this is before outsourcing, remember, 84, Mitel had its own manufacturing operations and ran its own MRP system, and it ran about 40 hours. So you'd run it once a week on the weekend and hope that it ran successfully and that the results made sense and were usable. Otherwise, typically about once a month on average, there was a problem with the MRP, and therefore had to make a decision. Do we rerun MRP for 2 days and shut transactions on the floor while it's running, or do we run off of last week's box of paper? Neither was terribly attractive. At the same time, one of the other founders, so I wasn't the founding president was Mike Cahy, but he came up with the idea that we had found a piece of hardware that ran logic simulation about 1,000 times faster than we could run it on our DEC faxes, which will definitely date me. And so the idea was maybe we could make a piece of hardware that we could run MRP in less than 5 minutes. With that idea, we started a company, and there off we went. So it was all about giving interaction to planners and let them really plan rather than just following the instructions on the piece of the computer printout that came to them.
So it sounds like just always looking for kind of continuous improvement. You talked about the MRP systems,
yeah,
and
yeah.
making them better.
Yeah, so it started with running it fast, so you could run multiple sessions and learn from it, and therefore do better, so you could iterate. As the company continued to grow and expand our footprint, we've added a user interface. We moved it all to the cloud. Well, in fact, we rewrote it all for the cloud and user interface, and added more functionality, full level pegging and availability date calculations, and what we call automated sourcing intelligence to help sort out the best path of supply to get satisfy customer demand from all the various sources that might be available through a very complicated supply network. But so it's all about making it interactive and helping planners do a better job.
So what was your role then? Were you just a thought leader, a business leader, a programmer?
Well, when you start a company with 3 of us, like the day we started, I think it was August 5th or something like that, 1984, the 3 of us sat around a card table in the classic basement office, rental suite, and sort of said, what have we done now? And if we weren't working, nothing was happening because there was just 3 of us. And so you do everything. You do what has to be done, right? So you do some design. I guess when it first started, I was doing what would now be called product management and some of the architectural design. The other founder, John Peacock, ran development. Mike was primarily responsible for sales and generating revenue as a startup, generating cash, I guess, as a startup. And so I ran some operations. I had some design activity, some architectural stuff. And then that's evolved. I've done different things for a little while. I was managing director I was for a little while we were looking for a new president. I've done lots of different things in the company.
Yeah, and you're still fairly active. I mean, how long has it been? 30, 40 years?
Well, it's 30, well, it was 36 years, so a little more than 36 years now that I've been with the company. Yeah, I've done lots of things. So what I love about Kinaxis and what I do is I get to solve problems, understand what's going on, meet and work with some great people, both internally and with our customers and partners. And yeah, it's still fun. So what else would I do?
Sure. And I've seen some of your taglines or things, your bios, that you're a Kinaxis fellow and a RapidResponse master. So what do those mean? Is that just marketing, or what does that represent?
Well, the Kinaxis fellow is like a university fellow, or a Bell Labs has fellows or had fellows. In my case, I think it means I'm unmanageable. So I've been with the organization long enough, and I guess people trust me to do, I'll say, the right thing. So I'm in the strategy team, but I do what I feel is most important, which oftentimes is responding to requests from others and helping others out. So helping people understand how to use the product, helping people understand what it does, helping potential customers understand what they could do with it. Not too many sales opportunities I get directly involved with, but a few. And I get involved with deployment projects. So I live deep in the weeds of the product. And then as I learn what people want to do or could do, I take that back to product management and product development and help the fulfillment of those ideas, if you like, verify that they actually solve the problem and therefore keep in touch with development, and then help roll it out to the field and help our field people understand what these new functionalities do and how to use them.
Duncan, let's go back to the beginning. Who was the first company, the first customer?
First customer was Nortel. So remember, we were making hardware. The first thing we did was hardware. So it was a 6 foot rack, a 6 foot rack, two of them side by side. So think of a French door fridge, big fridge, full of gear. And at the bottom of each of those two racks was a air blower to keep it all cool, which I tease it is only slightly smaller than what you see in a regional jet in terms of the amount of airflow. That's overstating, but it moved a lot of air and it was actually quite noisy. And that connected to a mini computer and a terminal. And so I've never been able to verify this, but we were selling those at about $600,000 or $700,000 US dollars each. And I'm pretty sure that would make the world's most expensive personal computer because one person could use this thing at a time. And it had, 16 racks of processors and memory. I think it had 156 megabytes of RAM in it, which at that time was huge. Of course, it's nothing now. So did that answer the question? I think I went off on the side.
No, that's good. That's any lessons learned from, as you grew the business, or interesting stories, great successes?
I think one of the things that we all learned, and I think you sort of know it, everybody knows it, but it doesn't hurt to repeat it. And that is the first rule of business is to stay in business. So you've got to have enough cash to do things like meeting payroll and pay the rent. And at times that's a challenge when you're selling a big piece of gear like that. It takes a long time to get it closed. I think the original Nortel contract had 26 different signatures on it. And if you think working a contract through an organization takes a week of signature, well, there's a half a year gone, right? And that's from when it's a done deal until it's a done deal is half a year. That can be challenging in terms of cash. We actually tracked our daily cash projections and projected out our daily cash requirements. So cash is king is the other another learning. And then the third one I'd say is the customer is always right. The customer may need a little bit of re-education, I'll say, but ultimately it's the customer that drives the business. So we've always had a very customer intimate business model where we really work closely with the customer, understand what their business is, understand what their needs are, and really help them get value and be successful. And that personally gives me a huge amount of pleasure when I see that a customer is able to do something that they were never able to do before, or find a situation that they can solve the first time they look at data in RapidResponse. They see something they didn't expect and they can send an email or get on the phone or whatever and solve $1 million problem just like that, because they were able to see the impact of something and take advantage of that, which they never knew before.
New ideas and new ways of doing things.
Yes,
yeah. So RapidResponse, you've said that a couple of times. What does that represent to you?
Well, RapidResponse is our product, a single model of your entire supply chain, as much data as you can get from your own organization, from your customers, customers, your suppliers, load that into RapidResponse. It all lives in memory. It's always in memory. It's not like a system that loads data into memory, runs its batch job and shuts down again. It's always there. It's always on. And as the data changes, it recalculates automatically and gives you a view of exactly the state of your supply chain. Plus, we have something else which is, as far as I know, really unique in the database world, and that's built-in versioning. So we don't have, well, we have one version of the truth, but we have multiple one versions of the truth, in the sense that you can create a child scenario off of any other scenario, and then you can go change data as much as you want. So if it's a private scenario, you can change any data that you want to simulate the impact of that change or those changes. and see what it does to your supply chain. So we have customers that keep snapshots. So what was the plan last week? What was the plan the week before that? And then they also do contingency planning with it to say, well, what if this supply disappears? So then you can shut off a part source, see what that does to your availability of custom orders and things like that. So hugely powerful system. And we don't store all the data. We only store the changes. So it's very efficient in terms of how much memory and it takes and how long it takes to load up and things because of the way we do our multi-version, multi-scenario database.
It sounds almost like a modeling simulation tool, correct?
Well, it is. That
Yeah,
is what
okay.
it is.
All right.
Exactly. Now it happens to run the current plan, if you like, the company operating plan is more like your normal system where you say, you know, what's going on to do, what are the recommendations, what are the actions, things like that. Is our understanding.
Let's look into the future, Duncan. What if you had to start another company? What would you be looking at today?
Good question. So I would say I actually listened to Bill Gates, a Bill Gates interview yesterday, and he commented that if you start a company, you'd really better love what you're doing because there are going to be times when it's tough. And if you don't love what you're doing, you do what any sane person would do and do something else. So I'd say that's the first thing is find something that you love doing and then stick at it. As I said, the first rule of business is to stay in business. So if you decide that it's not going where you want it to be going, figure out what you like, figure out what's fun, maybe do a pivot towards that if there's a better market opportunity, but it still has to be something that you enjoy doing. In terms of supply chain specifically, boy, there's lots going on. The complexity of companies. So I remember when we were at Mitel, HP had $4 billion in revenue and people just shook their heads and said, wow, what a huge company. Now, 4 billion in revenue hardly raises an eyebrow, right? Like you're talking 40 or more $billion in revenue for a company that is significant, I would say. So part of that, I guess, is inflation, but part of that is the complexity and the scope of products and the scale of the market that people are able to address. So back to supply chain, how can we help people manage their supply chains with another order of magnitude increase in the data volumes and complexity of what they're trying to do? Every company is similar but different. So every company, every successful company at least, has some unique aspect of either their product or their market or their processes that lets them stay in business. And so you have to satisfy that unique requirement for each company as they magnify by or amplify by 10x. So I think that's the challenge in supply chain. What tools will be needed to do that? Well, clearly you can't just keep throwing more and more people at every problem. So computers are involved more and more. The need is there to automate more and more. So if you can automate 80, 90% of the supply chain transactions, that means that your people can get 5 to 10x more value from the time they spend on doing something themselves. So that's huge. So I think automating activities, connecting the links. So one of the things that I've been promoting a lot of late, but I've had it in the back of my head for a long time, is that managing a supply chain, we should be thinking of that as a control system. So in engineering, an awful lot of engineering curriculum deals with control systems, the math to understand how to manipulate and optimize those things, but a lot of it deals with control theory. And one of the big aspects of control systems is delay. So every control system pretty much has a feedback loop. So if you think of your cruise control in your car, it's sampling the speed and adjusting the throttle 1,000 times or more a second. And that keeps a pretty smooth speed and it works pretty well. If you think about it for just a second, if the cruise control only adjusted the throttle once every minute, it would not be a smooth ride at all. You'd be over accelerating and then slowing down and then speeding up because it would have no way of responding to the changes of up and down the hills or around curves and things like that would slow you down. And so it would overreact. Or it would be so slow in responding that you would just not be happy either. So supply chain management, I believe, is the same thing. So if you've got 6 or 7 layers of companies involved and different processes like S&OP, MPS, production planning, distribution planning, each of these being different modules that runs sequentially, each company adds a huge amount of time delay, plus there's transit times and shipping times and production times or lead times. So there's huge delays throughout the supply chain. So is it any wonder that we have a bullwhip effect? Again, think of the cruise control, how well that would not work if it was adjusting the throttle once a minute. So whatever we can do to take time, take delay out of the system. Again, control theory has talked a lot about having a model of the system, and especially when the system takes a while to respond, if you have a model of the system, you can estimate what the system would do to your change in controls or changes in inputs, and therefore predict what's going to happen and adjust its controls accordingly, and therefore give stability and better response of the system. So that is what RapidResponse does. We are a digital twin or a digital model of your entire supply chain. So we tell you what's likely to happen when you do these changes, and therefore what actions your partner should be taking, et cetera, et cetera. So ripple the change up and down the entire supply chain as close to instantaneously as possible so that everybody reacts at the same time and therefore takes delay out and adds stability and resiliency, agility to your supply chain. So that's some of the things that people could be looking at, I guess.
Now that you've given me another idea, Duncan, that's, you know, a lot of the cars now in the States, they have this, I don't know what it's called, but they have the lane assist and the
lane keeping assistance.
Lane keeping, and you put the cruise control on, and it lets you know how close you are to the car ahead of you. It slows down and adjusts.
Yeah, the automatic cruise control is again another enhancement because it's got additional sensors and additional elements going into the control, and it's expanded now. So with the cruise control and the lane keeping assist and the proximity detection, it's now controlling not just throttle but also brakes and steering. It's extended what it's managing. And it makes driving a lot more relaxing. I'm amazed that when I turn those assists on, that on a long drive like I just did, it's not nearly as tiring as it used to be because you don't have to worry about a bunch of stuff. I'll say.
You still have to pay attention, but you don't have to concentrate nearly as much. But that's the idea. You said maybe I don't know what that whole system is called, autonomous driving or whatever, but we almost need that for supply chain. That would be kind of neat.
Well, in fact, yes. So that's I think we'll never have a supply chain that's totally run by a bank of computers. There's stuff that's just outside of the scope of whatever program you've got. Now, you keep adding to what's automated and what's adding to what the computer does, but as your scope goes up by a factor of 10, then the likelihood of more uncertainty and more unexpected variations increases, and therefore there's still lots of work for people to do, if only in improving the system. But in fact, analyzing some different situation, building relationships. So the computers don't set up relationships with each other automatically. They can find out what services are available, I guess, but they can't set up a relationship. That takes people to set up the relationship, and then the people set up the computers to do the standard normalized transactions. So people still need to be involved in the supply chain to extend it, adding new participants, changing how it operates, et cetera, et cetera.
Now, Duncan, you dropped a lot of terms in there, S&OP, MPS, bullwhip, and that makes me start thinking about APIX, which I'm a fan of APIX, and many of our listeners will be APIX fans. So you have a bit of history with APIX or ASCM.
Yes, ASCM now, or KPIC as it's called in Canada. I've been a member for, I think, 40 years or so. I think I had a lapse in there maybe, so my official membership is 25 plus, but anyway, of the current membership term. Yeah, I've been a member a long time. I was on the executive of the Ottawa chapter for a few years, quite a few years ago, helped with the educational side of it, which, as you might have gathered, kind of fits into things I like to do, some of my passions. I like teaching people and helping people learn and understand, and so being involved with the education committee of the APIX chapter was something I enjoyed doing. I would add, as a pitch for APIX or ASCM, it's a great opportunity for people to develop management and leadership skills. there is nothing harder than managing a group of volunteers. You don't have any of the commercial levers that are available as a company manager. And so if you can manage a group of volunteers, that is great experience and great training for a future management within a company or running a company for that matter.
As I tell people, it's kind of like herding cats, correct?
Yes.
Managing volunteers.
Yeah, figuring out why would this person volunteer? What do they want to get out of it? And giving them the opportunities to get whatever it is they want to get out of it. And maybe a few things they hadn't thought of that would also be useful to them.
Now, something that might apply to what, Kinaxis is doing or has done is the beer game. Have you ever heard of the beer game associated with
Yeah,
supply
well,
chain?
I've heard of the beer game. Funny you should ask that, Chris, is I think it was just last week, for the first time ever, I actually played in the beer game. And it was very informative, I'll say. I mean, I'm certainly well familiar with the operation of the supply chain and well familiar with the operation of the beer game. I was put in at the retail level, so I was driving it. I was very conscious that decisions I was making at the retail level would impact the 3 levels below me, and therefore I tried very hard to keep stability, and still screwed up a bit, not as it turned out nearly as badly as another team that was playing at the same time, but it was very instructive. And that leads back to what RapidResponse, the Kinaxis product, does, is at the end of the game, I wished I could have told my warehouse what I was doing and why I was increasing or decreasing my order. I wish I knew what they were going to place as an order for the next cycle. And similarly, why they didn't satisfy the demand I was passing at them. I presume it's because they ran out of stock, but I don't know for sure, nor do I know what they were ordering from the distribution center, et cetera, et cetera. So if we'd had concurrent planning where we could all see what each level was doing, and if we'd had collaboration so we could talk and I could say, look, I'm decreasing right now because I've got too much inventory, but only for this one period because then I'll burn it off and we'll be better. So don't you overreact. Or I'm increasing because I think there's been an increase in demand, which I think is sustaining. So therefore, you should be increasing your production as well, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the collaboration. So I'm dying to try this again with collaboration and concurrent planning going on and see if the results are significantly better. I'm sure they will be.
Yeah, it's always an interesting game, especially if you're not familiar with the ideas of collaboration and sharing at the start. It can become very frustrating. You're like, what?
Well, in
like,
fact, the beer game doesn't let you collaborate or communicate, so that prevents you from doing so. If you could, I think that would be really interesting to see how much better the supply chain would operate.
Well, Duncan, anything else you'd like to share about your history or what you're thinking about before I ask my last questions?
Well, that's been an interesting conversation. I think we've covered a lot of ground here. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, well, one thing, just to get your perspective on this, something I like to conclude with is always getting the guest perspective on the future of careers in supply chain management. So do you have suggestions or guidance for any students entering university that might be looking at supply chain management, or even experienced professionals that might want to make a career change into supply chain management? Any thoughts there?
Well, first of all, I'd say, I think this goes on a theme you have, Chris, supply chain is by no means boring. On one hand, we're trying to do the same stuff that we've been trying to do for 40 years, get the right stuff to the right place at the right time. But there's so much variability and there's so much complexity and uncertainty going on. It's by no means boring. And I think in terms of students, the first thing is how many students even know that they could potentially have a career in supply chain and that it might be something interesting. So for sure, they need to be thinking about data science and statistics and maybe some optimization. There's a lot of math. I would like to see supply chain planning get renamed as it gets refocused and becomes like either network planners, which is one way of looking at it, or network managers, or even supply chain engineer would be an interesting title to indicate the higher level of I'll say, academic involvement in it, and the difficulty and complexity of being successful, of successfully managing a very complicated supply chain.
Yeah, one thing I keyed on is just you mentioned it about 10 minutes ago was the focus on, regardless of how we automate transactions in supply chain, there's still going to be a need to manage the relationships. And
Yeah,
that's
so
key.
everything is people, process, and technology. They really go together. To some extent, the technology is the least. On the other hand, you can adjust the processes based on different technology, or you need to adjust the processes to take advantage of different technology. And that means almost always that you need different skills in the people that are operating it.
Well, super. I appreciate your perspective, and I appreciate your position that supply chain is not boring. So you may have proven me wrong today.
Well, I hope so. As I said, I'm still finding it exciting after 36 years now of doing this game. It's exciting, it's interesting, and it's fun. So, Chris, thank you for taking the time to talk with me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, Duncan, thanks for what you've done to the industry, for the industry, and also thanks for investing time with me.
All right, most welcome.
Supply Chain is Boring is part of the Supply Chain Now network. We highlight historical events, companies, and people in supply chain management, and create a picture of where the industry is headed. Interested in learning more about supply chain technology startups, mergers, acquisitions, and how companies evolve? Take a listen to Tequila Sunrise, crafted by Greg White. Or check out This Week in Business History with Supply Chain Now's own Scott Luton to learn more about everyday things you may take for granted and pick up short stories you can use as general conversation starters. The Logistics with a Purpose series puts a spotlight on neat and interesting organizations who are working toward a greater cause. If you're interested in logistics, freight, and transportation, take a listen to the Logistics and Beyond series with the Adapt and Thrive Mindset Sherpa, Jamin Alvarez. And check out the newest program, Tech Talk, hosted by industry veteran and Atlanta's own Corinne Bursa. Bursa will discuss all things digital supply chain. If interested in sponsoring this show or others on Supply Chain Now, send a note to chris@supplychainnow.com. And remember, supply chain is boring.